Put the groceries back. The cashier reached for the paper bags. An elderly man lowered his eyes, his trembling fingers searching every pocket of his worn coat for money that wasn't there. I'm sorry, he whispered. A customer behind him scoffed. If you can't afford dinner, don't waste everyone else's time. Another rolled her eyes. People like him always expect someone else to pay. The old man said nothing. His shoulders sank as the cashier began removing bread, milk, and canned soup from the counter. Before another item could be taken away, a calm voice broke the silence. Please charge everything to my card. A plus-size woman stepped forward and placed her bank card on the register. The old man stared at her in disbelief. She answered with nothing more than a gentle smile. Everyone deserves to go home with dinner. The supermarket fell strangely quiet. Outside, a man in a dark suit touched the earpiece hidden beneath his collar. Sir, your grandfather has just been approached. No one inside realized the frail old man they had mocked was Walter Cassini, the beloved grandfather of Chicago's most feared Mafia boss. For a long moment, Walter remained standing beside the checkout counter, his grocery bags untouched. The embarrassed silence that had settled over the supermarket lingered long after the cruel remarks had faded. The customers who had mocked him suddenly found the tiled floor fascinating. Even the cashier, who had only been following store policy, looked uncomfortable. The woman who had stepped in didn't appear angry. She didn't glare at anyone. She didn't ask for recognition. She simply accepted her receipt, handed Walter one of the heavier bags, and smiled as though helping a stranger was the most ordinary thing in the world. You really shouldn't have done this, Walter said softly, still trying to process what had happened. She shrugged with an easy smile. I know. He blinked, surprised. But I'm glad I did. Walter cleared his throat. At least let me reimburse you. She shook her head. No, I insist, and I politely refuse. The corners of Walter's mouth lifted despite himself. You drive a hard bargain. I own a bookstore, she replied with a quiet laugh. Negotiating comes with the job. For the first time since realizing his wallet was missing, Walter laughed as well. The sound felt unfamiliar after the humiliation of the last few minutes. What if I simply want to thank you? Priya adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag before answering. Then promise me something. Anything. If you ever see someone else having a bad day, she glanced toward the checkout lanes, where the impatient customers had suddenly become very quiet. Be the person who makes it a little better. Walter studied her face. There was no calculation, no curiosity, no attempt to discover who he was, no expectation that the elderly man before her could somehow change her life. Only kindness, the kind that existed because someone chose it every single day. You don't even know my name, Walter observed. She smiled. I don't need to. Then, almost as an afterthought, she extended her hand. I'm Priya. Walter. They shook hands, like two old neighbors meeting for the first time. Take care of yourself, Walter. You too, Priya. She picked up her own shopping bag and headed toward the exit without looking back. Walter watched until she disappeared through the automatic doors. Only then did one of the discreet security agents approach from outside. Mr. Cassini, are you all right? Walter nodded. I am now. As another guard retrieved the forgotten wallet from the back seat of the waiting car, Walter looked across the parking lot, just in time to see Priya unlocking a weathered blue hatchback. On the rear window was a small decal. Harlow's Corner Bookstore. Walter quietly repeated the name to himself. Once, then again, making certain he would never forget it. That evening, The Cassini family gathered for dinner inside the penthouse, overlooking downtown Chicago. The dining room reflected generations of success, yet the atmosphere remained surprisingly warm. Marco Cassini arrived late from a board meeting, his tailored charcoal suit carrying the authority expected of a man who controlled shipping routes, real estate developments, and a considerable share of the city's underground economy, depending on which room he happened to be standing in. "You're quiet tonight," Marco said, noticing his grandfather's contemplative expression as he took his seat. "I had an interesting afternoon," Walter said. He told the story simply, without embellishment. The humiliation at the checkout counter, the strangers who had looked away, and the plus-size woman with a canvas bag who had stepped forward without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. Marco set down his fork. "Where does she work?" "A bookstore. Harlow's Corner." Walter watched his grandson's expression carefully, struggling, from the look of her car and her coat, but she didn't seem to know it, or didn't seem to care. Marco said nothing for a long moment, but something in his face had changed, a stillness that his security detail would have recognized instantly as the look he wore right before making a decision that could not be undone. "I'd like to meet her," he said finally. "Marco." Walter's tone carried a warning, gentle but unmistakable. "Don't turn kindness into a transaction. She didn't help me because she wanted something from this family." "I know." Marco's voice softened. "That's exactly why I want to meet her." Harlow's Corner bookstore occupied a narrow storefront, wedged between a laundromat and a shuttered pharmacy, the kind of neighborhood block that developers had been circling for years, waiting for property values to justify demolition. Inside, the shelves sagged slightly under the weight of second-hand paperbacks, and a hand-lettered sign near the register read, "Books are cheaper than therapy, and last longer." Priya was restocking a shelf of mystery novels when the bell above the door chimed. She glanced up, expecting a regular customer, and instead found a tall man in a well-tailored gray sweater standing in the doorway, looking distinctly out of place among the crowded shelves. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. "Actually, I'm looking for the owner." "That's me." She wiped her hands on her jeans and extended one. "Priya Harlow. Marco Cassini." He shook her hand, watching her face for the flicker of recognition most people gave his name. It didn't come. She simply smiled and gestured toward the shelves. "Well, Marco, what kind of books do you actually read, or are you here for the business section?" "Everyone who dresses like that comes in for the business section." Marco found himself smiling, genuinely, for the first time in longer than he could easily remember. "I read mysteries, actually. My grandfather got me into them." "Your grandfather has excellent taste, then." She led him toward the mystery section. "What did he tell you about me?" Marco hesitated only briefly. "That you paid for his groceries yesterday, when nobody else would." Understanding crossed her face, followed quickly by embarrassment. "Oh, that was your grandfather? I hope he wasn't upset that I—" "He wasn't upset. He hasn't stopped talking about it." Marco studied a row of book spines without really seeing them. "I wanted to thank you myself." "You really don't need to. I didn't do it to be thanked." "I know." He met her eyes. "That's the part I can't stop thinking about." Marco began visiting Harlow's Corner regularly after that, always with some flimsy pretext about needing a new mystery novel, though both of them slowly stopped pretending that was the only reason. He learned that Priya had inherited the store from her aunt 6 years earlier, that she'd kept it running through 2 brutal winters and a rent increase that nearly closed the doors twice, that she gave books to children whose families couldn't afford them, and simply wrote off the loss as the cost of doing business the way she wanted to. He also learned, slowly and carefully, what he was walking into by falling for her. Priya had spent years absorbing careless comments about her size from customers, from a handful of cruel former acquaintances, from a world that seemed determined to make her feel like she needed to apologize for taking up space. She'd built a quiet, unshakable armor around herself, not bitter, simply guarded, the armor of someone who had learned not to expect kindness, returned in equal measure. Marco never once treated her like something fragile, or like a project to be improved, or like a woman who should be grateful for his attention. He simply showed up, week after week, carrying heavy delivery boxes without being asked, remembering which authors she loved, listening when she talked about the neighborhood kids who came in after school, just to sit in the reading corner where it was warm. "You know what I am," Marco told her one evening, months into their careful, unhurried courtship, after she'd finally asked him directly about the security detail that always seemed to linger somewhere nearby. "I have a guess," Priya said carefully. "I'd rather you know for certain than guess wrong." He told her plainly, without excuses, without softening the truth, the way most men in his position would have. The organization his family controlled. The violence that lived underneath the legitimate businesses. The world he moved through, that she would be stepping into, if she chose to stay. Priya listened without flinching, without the performative shock he'd half expected. "Why are you telling me all of this?" "Because I've watched you give away books you couldn't afford to lose, to kids who couldn't afford to buy them, for 6 years running this store into the ground, rather than turn anyone away." Marco's voice was quiet, entirely without pretense. "I've spent my whole life around people who calculate exactly what they can get from every interaction. You've never once calculated anything with me." He gently took her hand. "And every time I walked through that door, I never once saw a woman who needed to become someone else. I only saw the woman I hoped would someday choose me." Priya could no longer hold back her tears. Not because her heart was breaking, but because for the very first time in her life, someone had fallen in love with her heart long before noticing anything else. Walter, watching from where he sat near the front window with his newest mystery novel, quietly smiled toward the bookshelves. Some gifts could never be purchased. They could only be earned, and his grandson had finally found one. Winter gradually gave way to spring. For the first time in many years, Harlow's corner bookstore no longer struggled to survive from month to month. Thanks to a partnership established through the Cassini Foundation, the little neighborhood shop had become the heart of a citywide reading initiative. Every Saturday morning, children filled the reading corner with laughter as volunteers read stories aloud. Local authors held free workshops for aspiring writers. Teachers borrowed classroom collections without worrying about limited school budgets. Shelves that had once stood half empty were now filled with donated books, waiting to find new homes. Priya often paused in the middle of busy afternoons just to watch the smiles around her. The bookstore had always been her dream. Now it had become something even greater. It had become hope shared with an entire community. Marco never tried to take credit. Whenever reporters asked about the project, he redirected the attention elsewhere. "The foundation provides resources," he would say. "Priya provides the heart." She always rolled her eyes whenever she heard the quote, "And you keep embarrassing me." He smiled. "I'll probably never stop." Walter remained the bookstore's most loyal visitor. Every Saturday afternoon, he appeared carrying a different mystery novel under his arm. He insisted he came only to browse. No one believed him, especially not Priya. "You've already read that one twice," she teased one weekend. Walter looked completely innocent. "I forgot how it ended." Marco laughed. "You solved the mystery before chapter 5. Walter shrugged. That doesn't mean I can't enjoy it again. Priya shook her head affectionately. You aren't checking on the books. Walter smiled knowingly. No, I'm checking on the people. His eyes moved from Priya to Marco. Finding them smiling beside one another was all the reassurance he ever needed. One sunny afternoon, a little girl wandered into the bookstore, holding a stack of picture books, almost as tall as she was. She looked up at Priya with complete seriousness. Can I ask you something? Of course. The little girl pointed toward Marco, who was carrying several heavy boxes of new books in from the delivery truck. Why does that handsome man always carry everything for you? Priya glanced toward Marco. He looked back with the same gentle smile that had first appeared the day he walked into her bookstore, pretending to buy business books. She laughed softly before answering. Because he says I carried something much heavier. The little girl frowned. What was it? Before Priya could answer, Marco walked over and gently placed the final box on the floor. He smiled warmly. She carried kindness. He reached for Priya's hand. Long before she ever carried my heart. The little girl smiled as though the answer made perfect sense. Priya's eyes met Marco's. No grand speeches were needed anymore. No secrets remained between them, only quiet certainty. Together, they locked the bookstore at closing time and stepped onto the sidewalk as the evening sun painted Chicago in shades of gold. Walter watched from inside the front window with quiet satisfaction. Months earlier, one small act of kindness had cost Priya only a few dollars. She had expected nothing in return. Yet that single choice had restored an old man's dignity, healed a lonely heart, created a family that neither she nor Marco had ever expected to find, and proved that the greatest fortunes in life are never measured by money. They are measured by the lives we choose to lift along the way. If this story reminded you that kindness costs less than we think and matters more than we know, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in choosing kindness, even when nobody's watching.